Welcome to the Spa Girls podcast, the self-publishing podcast for authors. You're in the right place for the best writing, marketing, and publishing advice, plus interviews with industry experts and best-selling authors. I'm Cheryl Phipps.
I'm Shah Barrett.
I'm Wendy Bella.
And I'm Trudy J. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
And this week we have the awesome Sacha Black on with us.
Hey, Sacha.
Yay.
Hello.
Welcome.
If you don't know who Sacha, sorry, I'm going to get confused with your name, but Sacha is, because I keep wanting to call her Sacha. I'm sorry. I apologize now at the beginning of our podcast.
We've only
She's all cool.
But it's okay.
That's fine. They've told me 10 times prior to the beginning. But anyway, Sacha.
Anyway, roll on.
I'll read your bio out and then we'll get started. But today's topic is going to be heroes and their side characters, which is going to be awesome. Mm-hmm. I'm super excited. Mm-hmm. So Sacha Black is a best-selling and competition-winning author of sapphic books for young adults, as well as the Rebel podcaster and professional speaker. She also writes educational non-fiction books for writers, including The Anatomy of Prose, 10 Steps to a Hero, 13 Steps to Evil, and 8 Steps to Side Characters. And I'd like to know why there are only 8 steps for side characters and 13 steps for the villains. So we should discuss that in a minute. She has 5 obsessions, which are words, expensive shoes, conspiracy theories, self-improvement, and breaking the rules, which I love. That's awesome. Welcome to the show.
That's a little bit of everything just there.
Yeah.
So I'm going to let you speak now. So can you give us
roll with it, mate. Just
roll with it. Can you give us how you got into writing and how you got into self-publishing, your journey into writing?
So I think if I was a little bit more self-aware, I probably would have written from day dot, because I was that child who wrote and only ever carried a notebook. And I lived in a really tiny village and I read everything in the village library, so much so that my mum had to take me to the next town across because there were no more books left for the children in that library.
Wow.
And that was probably a predictor of where things were going to go.
Yeah.
Of course, like English was my favorite subject at school. I, was the teacher's pet in English, did very well. And then, rightly so, my mum suggested that I go to university and get a degree that was career aligned or career driven. I come from a family of creatives, but of varying degrees, and so the suggestion was go and get a degree, and then if it's still something that you want to do, then do it later. So I went and got a degree, then I got a master's, then I got a scholarship to do a PhD at Macquarie in Sydney. I turned it down because I was done. I was done doing education. I had enough and I wanted to earn some money.
What was your degree in, just out of curiosity?
So my degree was psychology. My first master's was a master's in cognitive neuropsychology.
Wow.
My PhD was based on a theory I came up with about distributed cognition. And then I got another master's because I went and did a fast track management scheme, and it was compulsory that you had to do a master's in public management as part of it. So anyway, I did that. And then I was literally about 6 months into working for this organization and was like, oh, poo, I've made a very bad decision, and promptly realized I needed to do something about it. So every person in the early 2010s, I resorted to drinking wine and blogging publicly under a pen name, because what else do you do when it's like 2012, right? So I blogged under Sacha Black, and mostly ranted hilarious rants about the day job and basically corporate bureaucracy. And as it was back then with WordPress and things, you sort of fall into these communities online, and the one that I fell into happened to be writers. And then someone was like, oh, come and do NaNoWriMo. And I was like, what is NaNoWriMo? And so then they were like, oh, it's like a thing where you write a novel in a month. I'm like, who can write a novel in a month? But of course, I'm hyper competitive. So I was like, I could do that.
I could do it.
And how hard
It's a
can it
thing.
be? Yeah.
Oh my
So I found my old notebooks, my teen notebooks, and of course wrote the biggest pile of pish ever. But the thing was, I actually did write every day. I don't write every day now, but that was it. The habit was made and formed, and I actually haven't looked back since.
Wow.
And that was how I found writing. And yeah.
That's very topical, given that we're recording this in November and it's NaNoWriMo month, and there's a number of people that we've had on the podcast that NaNoWriMo was how they got their start.
Do you still do NaNoWriMo?
Not really, but only because it doesn't fall at the right time. If it weren't for the fact that I was going to 20 Books Vegas, I would be doing Nano this month, because I have just started writing. But I actually can write a book faster than Nano now, so I don't need Nano in the same way. So it then becomes a little bit difficult, because you don't want to slow yourself down to do the Nano. It seems bonkers to do that. So I've sort of outgrown it.
It's a great thing.
It's a tool.
If you're just
It's a tool.
it's so good if you're just starting out.
Yeah. So actually now, this is a complete aside and not what we're supposed to be talking about, but I'm just really curious. So how many books do you write in a year, and how long are they, and how fast do you write?
Okay, so it's very recent that I have discovered my ability to write quickly. And up until August, I was probably spending 50% of my working time doing freelance work. I don't need to do that anymore. I'm still doing a tiny bit just because I love who I work for. But so have you heard of Clifton Strengths?
Trudy and I are big fans. Wendy is still recovering from having taken the top 5 test and is still arguing with it, and she refuses. So just to give you the lay of the land here.
Oh, well, so when I took mine, I was like, what is this? I am so not competitive. And my wife laughed in my face and was like, are you joking? And I was like, what do you mean?
How dare you?
But this is a joke, right? And I was like, no. She was like, you are singly the most competitive person I've ever met in my entire life ever. And I was like, I don't understand. And it took 2 coaching sessions for them to convince me that I was number 1 competition. So I really do understand your pain, trust me. But the test is right. Just go with it, okay? So
I'm
number 1
5
competition.
Okay, Tell us your other ones.
Competition, achiever, strategic, learner, significance.
Nice.
Good.
And then it's activator, command, focus, input, self-assurance. So I'm all yellow all day long. But the point is, I had been writing in the completely the wrong way for me. And essentially what happened is so I'm predominantly kind of the influencing strengths, then strategic thinking strengths. So I need to give myself enough thinking time before I start writing. But then once I get to that writing point, I go real quick. And I use OWrite, which is an online like a web room, and you can see other people's word counts, but you can't see what they're writing.
Oh, wow.
And not only that, so this helps for my competition, but it also helps achiever, because for every 100 words you write, you get a black star. And for every 1,000 words you write, you get a gold star. I like a gold star. So
Shazam, she's writing that down.
I've already written down.
So the first time I did this, my old average, I used to write about 2,000 words a day in my working day. And that was average. That's what I did. And then this friend of mine introduced me to OWrite, and she was like, let's go for an hour. And I was like, okay, cool. I wrote 2,000 words in that 1 hour. And I have never looked back. That was like, it was instant, because they were writing. And I was like, hold on, well, don't leave me, I'm not going behind, I'm not going behind. and then that was it. Like, and so I just have to be honest and be like, look, if you're going to write with me, I'm going to try and beat your word count, okay? So,
I love that.
I just don't know if I could do that.
Well, that's the thing. So the people that I write with aren't competitive, and it doesn't matter for them. They like maybe just want maybe they want the community aspect of it, or maybe they want the achiever pennies, right? But for me, I see other people working, and I do not want to be left behind.
Yeah.
I feel that.
We're all going to go in and have a look though now, aren't we? All of us are going to go in and have a look now.
So I already just have.
Next time you're on.
I just have, because, you know, suddenly this is now bookmarked, included on my browser thing, but it's ohwrite as in ohwrite.co.
Yeah.
Okay.
Love it.
Try it.
Right.
And we'll probably
Never
meet you
heard
in
of
there
it.
next
I've heard
time,
of words for not words with friends. There for the words. I've heard of that one as another.
Yeah.
So to actually answer your question, because I realize I didn't, next year I'm aiming for 5 to 7, because I don't do this day in, day out. When I get to writing, I write very quickly, but I don't write quickly all of the time, because I need intellection time.
Yes.
And my books are long. They're like about 85k. They're not short ones.
Yeah.
So that's just about learning the strengths and leaning into them, right? You know. Yeah.
Makes me feel like we need Becca back on the podcast just to talk about that a bit more.
Let's do it.
Okay, I love it. Oh, that's awesome. Okay. Oh, I'm excited. All right. So actually, let's get on to the actual topic of the actual podcast now. And we wanted to talk about heroes and their side characters, because you've written a book on both hero and side characters. And I wanted to start a little bit with the hero, and what makes a good hero, and then we want to lead into the difference between a hero and a side character, and why side characters are actually important. So, first question, I don't know, maybe what is a hero? And
so I differentiate between heroes and protagonists.
Okay.
So for me, a hero is definitely more on the fantasy side of things, and somebody who has some kind of special ability. Doesn't necessarily have to be magical, but some kind of extraordinary something about them. The protagonist is essentially who the story is about. It is the person who goes through the most significant change in comparison to all of the other characters. So I mean, that is probably the easiest way for me to describe the differences between the two.
So when is it a hero and when is it a protagonist? Is it just the type of story, the genre?
A hero can be a protagonist, because if you're writing a fantasy story, you obviously have a protagonist, and if they have magical powers, they can be a hero too. But if you were writing, say, contemporary romance, you're going to have a protagonist rather than a hero. And for me, like, I know other people don't use the same definitions, but whenever I start a book, I always define my personal terms so that people understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Okay, so in your mind, that the heroes are really, so you someone who's doing something heroic, right? Like someone's going to save someone or slay something or whatever. Is that kind of...
for me, it's much more on the, like, almost the comic book level type of superhero, as opposed to like protagonist, who could be in any type of genre. So the easiest terminology to use when we're talking about writing books in general across broad spectrum like genres is to use the word protagonist as opposed to hero.
All right. So because I'm thinking when we're talking about it, we'd maybe talking about protagonist then versus the hero, because I feel like the heroes are very almost a niche part of that. So so can we talk about the protagonist? And so if someone's just starting a book, like, for example, do you have all your characters planned out from the beginning before you know anything about, before you start writing? Do you know their wound? Like, what are the things that you need to have?
Okay. So I definitely, well, the funny thing is, for me personally, I actually start with world building. I start with the setting, and often the characters come then from that. But in terms of when I am looking at characters, I use a framework for side characters, which we'll talk about in a second. But in terms of the hero, yes, definitely. Like, the one thing for me is I can't really get into their voice and what they sound like without knowing, like, their backstory, their past, and kind of the context that they come from, including their wound, but also whatever it is that they want. And for me, there has to be some kind of yin yang with the villain. Although the villain can want the same thing as the hero, but for different reasons. For me, I really like juxtaposing them. So, for example, in the book I'm writing now, my protagonist basically wants absolute power. And the love interest thinks that absolute power corrupts. So they want the complete opposite thing. And then, of course, the love interest is going to have to take hold of absolute power. and the protagonist is going to have to let go of that, right? So you get that nice like yin yang bit. The other thing that I do with protagonists is, just to confuse matters, I call it the hero lens. But essentially, I know this is terrible naming conventions here, but basically, nothing happens in your story without the reader going through either the protagonist's eyes or the narrator's eyes. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to say protagonist, okay? So just assume we're talking about the same thing. And so the reader follows the story through your protagonist, and therefore that protagonist has a particular way of looking at things, a particular lens. Just like we say rose-tinted spectacles, I think of it as hero-tinted spectacles. And so the four main things that determine that like color of rose-tinted spectacles are the thoughts, dialogue, actions, and emotions. And so I like to do a little bit of an exercise before I start writing. And I will put my protagonist in a particular scene or location. It's a nothing scene or location. It's not even important. One that I typically use in classes is I say, right, put your protagonist on the beach and write for the next 5 minutes. And then I want you to take the villain and put them on the exact same beach, and now put them through exactly the same experience and write the same scene. And what that does is it forces you to think through the eyes of that protagonist or the villain or the love interest or whoever, and see what they experience differently. And I try to make sure that, you know, I'm using sensory language, because one person, Grumpy Sunshine, for example, can go on that beach and be like, the sand through my toes, it feels delicious, the warmth of the sun on my skin, you know, all of that stuff. And then the grumpy person can go in there and be like, the sand is like grating between my toes, you know, I'm hot, I'm sticky. And so what this does is it forces you to think about what is unique about your hero, your protagonist, what is unique about your love interest, and how do they see and feel the world differently to each other, even when they're in the identical situation. So that's the thing that really helps me.
Wow,
that's awesome.
It's also a great exercise in showing and not telling, right? It just really strengthens that kind of muscle, because I think for a lot of us, particularly those of us that are newer writers, it's a tricky one to get out of. So I love that.
And it's also about it's the visceral thing. It's like, okay, so maybe about the sights and the sounds and the touching, the taste that you have to think about, that's going to be the different things in the actions. I love that.
Well, the thing is, characters are action, right? That's all they have in the story, is their action and their agency. So you need to know what their action and agency looks like compared to the other people, and compared to how other people experience it in the same story, in the same situations.
That's cool. So and this is interesting, like I'm just thinking, I was doing a session with my editor the other day, and she came back and we decided one of them wasn't quite his sort of motivations and his worldview, I guess, wasn't strong enough. Are there any tips you have about like how to sit down and kind of know when you've got your characters kind of worldview, their rose-colored glasses on, strong enough, if that makes sense? Like how are you, when you've done enough to make them?
I think it's about understanding like how their opinions differ and which opinions they have that are strong, right? Because you only have a certain number of pages, and in order to get the characterization to really come across on the page, it's like picking traits. You can only really pick 1 or 2 traits that you really want to show. So if that's the case, well, how do you take that trait or that opinion and take it to the next level? How do you not necessarily, I'm not talking about making everything extremist, but it is almost like one step beneath that, right? They're these flawed characters, therefore they have to have flawed opinions. And so how do you display that inaccuracy, that wrongness, making sure that you are showing that they have these opinions that are incorrect. I'm all this is in air quotes, you know, but like incorrect or wrong. I think that is really, really important, because we have these social norms in society, right? So you almost have to go against a social norm or a social expectation in order to kind of like have that juxtaposition or that like contrast to show it, a bit like Spock and Kirk, Captain Kirk. Yeah, like it's a bit, those two work so well together because they're so completely different. So yeah, I think it's really important to like find that opinion that the character has, and then kind of like 10x it. Even the heroes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's so true.
Sense.
It does.
Yeah.
And so you've got the four things: so thought, dialogue, action, emotion. Is there anything else to add in terms of those? Like is it just how you're when you're thinking about it in that scene on the beach, you just think about what they're saying, what they're doing, how they're thinking, and how they're feeling?
Well, if we take who they are as a person, so one of the things that I do is I say, okay, look, we've got a professor, an academic professor, and we've got a gangster, like a gang member. So that kind of aspect to their personality should influence each one of those four aspects. So a professor is going to go, oh God, and you're putting me on the spot now, and I'm terrible on the spot, but he might think about the texture of the sand and think, oh, I wonder if anybody is studying the erosion on this beach and the impact on the wildlife here, whereas the gangster might be like, yo, where's my mates, like I want a barbecue, or like whatever. Like he's not, so that's in terms of their thoughts like that. Whereas the dialogue, the professor's going to have likely longer sentences, and individual words are likely to be longer. He might put words like, or she might put words in like, furthermore, in addition, the consequence of, whereas the gang member is going to talk like, nah mate, I just like, oh, the sand, it's awful, innit, like that's sort of so the dialogue's going to be shorter words, less complex words, probably shorter sentences, probably slang as well. And then in terms of actions, and this is like, I'm stereotyping so badly here, so I apologize to everybody, but like the professor might sit on the beach and read a book and take a towel, right? That's the actions that he's going to take. Whereas the gang member is probably going to crack a beer and probably chuck the can on the beach and leave the can on the beach, right? And disrespect the beach, because that's a different personality, different actions. And then again, let those personality traits or those, aspects of their person influence their emotions as well. So the professor might be reflective. If he's got a day off work, he's on the beach, he's reading, he might be reflective. The gangster, I don't have a clue. I'm not very good with emotion. I mostly feel excitement and rage in my life. But anyway, the gang member might be chill, because he's with his mates, so he's like chilling. So, but it's and so it's thinking about how those personality traits influence at the sentence level those four elements.
That's perfect.
That's
good example. I mean, so I'm curious then, so for example, if we talk about the wound or the belief and then what they want, so if we but let's stay with the professor and the gangster, because they're kind of a nice juxtaposition, easy to kind of understand against each other. So if there was a wound,
and she does the voice of the gangster so well.
I love it. So if you were and you take these characters and you go, okay, so what do they want, and what is their wound, and belief that's going to stop them from getting what they want? Is that kind of where you would go with that? Or
I mean,
if they were the protagonist,
sorry, say that again.
If they were the protagonist, obviously, and not a
so if they were, I mean, now you're asking me to craft a whole story live on air.
I know. It's awesome, right? I'm so good at that. Putting you on the
What is the question?
So no, I just was thinking, okay, so if we take the professor and we say he's the protagonist, we've already established kind of some of his parameters in terms of his personality, but so when you're crafting the character, you would, like, for example, for me, I'd say, okay, what's his wound? Would you, or his belief that he's, that he's carrying around that we're going to somehow disprove within the course of the story? So his wound,
so I can't do that in context because I need all the context. So I can give you the example with the book I'm working on now. So I've got one character who wants absolute power, and that comes from a childhood wound. So I would absolutely do that with the professor, but I would need to think up something like
that's my bad. I'm putting you on the spot.
So for example, yeah, I have this character who wants absolute power, and it definitely comes from a wound because she thinks that's the only way she can be enough to get people to accept her is by controlling everybody. That's the lie. The only way to get people to accept me is to control them. And that comes from stuff that happened in her childhood, the way that she was treated, her parents, the fact that she's living under a lie with who her parents are. And then for the other character, it's exactly the same. Like, why does she think absolute power is all corruption? It's because somebody who had absolute power took everything from her, right? So these things absolutely do come from the wounds. And if only I could think quicker, I'd be able to give you an example for the professor. Exactly.
No, that's
perfect.
That's
fine. Perfect.
No, that's good. That's exactly what I wanted to just clarify in terms of the. So are there any other tips or any other things that someone who's crafting a protagonist needs to think about that you would make sure that you put in place before starting the story?
I mean, there are loads, but if we want to talk about side characters, then there are lots of things that we can do with side characters that help and influence the protagonist.
Okay. Yeah. So let's go there then. So what's the difference between a protagonist and a side character? What is the So obviously the protagonist is who the story is about. They're the person that's going to go through the biggest change. For me, a side character then is a plot device, and they function in the story because of the protagonist. If we don't have a protagonist, we don't have a story. So it's tricky because obviously we want readers to feel like these characters are full and like in and of themselves, but really they're not, because they are actually really just there for the protagonist. So it's like this balancing act that we have to strike. I always think of like the protagonist as the heart of a story, and then the side characters a bit like the arteries, right? They are, and the veins, they are either like flowing towards the protagonist and helping the protagonist, or they're flowing away out the veins and kind of that push pull, like either helping or hindering the protagonist. And like they do so many things that the side characters are there as conflict like generators. They help to create subplots, and they help to put obstacles in the way, question the protagonist, help the protagonist. They do all of these things to help the protagonist like go through that character change. So in the simplest terms, they are really just a plot device. But side character.
I know, I feel so
you have so much fun
with,
you can have so much fun with side characters though, don't you? Can't you?
100%. They're my fave. Always my favorite character in any book I read is always a side character.
Especially in series, don't you think? Because you're always looking for more about them.
Well, and it's funny how often they sort of develop a life of their own, and they end up having a book of their own. If you're
Well, the reason for that is because there's less rules, right? The protagonist must follow a particular path. The protagonist must go through a certain number of obstacles, a certain dark night of the soul, an inciting incident. There is so much less freedom with the protagonist, and that is why everybody falls for the side characters, because they are unrestricted and they get to have all the fun essentially.
So they're basically they're moving the story forward, and they're sort of helping the show not tell, aren't they, as well?
I mean, they do lots and lots of different things, like they can help to create conflict. They can even like air quotes tell things when your protagonist, like you don't want your protagonist to do that. We can talk about the fact that, like how to make the protagonist feel like they're more than just the plot device, because obviously that's what you want to do. But essentially that is what they are.
Can you write a book without side characters? And have it
you can do anything. There's
would it be a good
Mike
book?
McCormack wrote solar something bones, I think it was, with one sentence. Can you have an entire story with one character? I'm sure somebody can do that. Castaway with Tom Hanks just had Tom Hanks and the football, right?
But I want to say I didn't like that movie. I thought it was a terrible movie because I'm like, there's nothing. There's a man on a beach with a ball,
and yet so many people loved it, right?
I know.
I enjoyed it.
I honestly don't think there is a single rule that you can't break if you know what you're doing. The problem with having no side characters and only one main character is you get no dialogue, and so it would make the pacing very slow of the story. I'm sure somebody cleverer than me can do it.
Yes. Clever people out there in the world. Okay, so this, if the side character is a tool, because is that why they're important? Is that why we would use them is it simply as a tool? It's no other reason for a side character.
I mean, there's lots and lots of reasons for them. Like I say, they create conflict, they create obstacles, they help the protagonist to come to their own realizations. There's different archetypes for them, right? Also, you know, thematically, they should represent the theme, but it really does depend. So one of the key things when I start talking about side characters is I talk about a framework in which to hang your side characters. So not all side characters are created equal. And for me, there are 3 different types of side character. So you've got a cameo, and that is what it says on the tin. So these are like the throwaway characters. They only appear like once or twice in your story. They may or may not have dialogue. You may or may not describe their appearance. Usually they just have some kind of like label, so like the girl with the teddy, or like the barman, or whatever. They don't need subplots, they don't need character arcs. Like the best example of this that I can think of, has anybody watched The Matrix?
Yes.
Okay, so the woman in the red dress, everybody knows who I'm talking about, but she has no words, has no role, really. She's just like throwaway character. Or Stan Lee, like in the Marvel movies, right? Stan Lee appeared for like 10 seconds in all the movies. That's a cameo. That happens in our stories as well. Then the next one up is a minor character, minor side character. They are in the stories like more frequently, but they don't really have too much depth. They don't leave the way that I like to differentiate them is they don't really leave a mark on the protagonist or the story. So they probably have like brief transactional exchanges. They're unlikely to need a backstory. They're unlikely to need a subplot or character arc. They probably need physical description purely because you're going to interact with them more often. Maybe like one memorable thing about them, but like I say, they basically just have these transactional exchanges. So Mr. Filch from Harry Potter is a great example of this. You could have Harry Potter without Mr. Filch and you're not going to miss anything. Wheezy from Toy Story, like that's another one. Like you could cut Wheezy out, you're not really going to miss anything. And then you have like the big guns of side characters, and these are what I call my major side characters. They do need some kind of subplot. They do need some kind of comprehensive character arc. They'll need a backstory. They'll need to be memorable. You don't need many of these. You only need a couple to make it really work, usually like the best friend or a couple of best friends, or the mum or whoever. These guys leave a mark on the story. You can't have like the major side character without them leaving a mark on the story. For example, best example, even though I don't like the artist, like the art, Hermione and Ron. It wouldn't be the same story without Hermione and Ron. So Trinity in The Matrix is another great example. Wouldn't be the same movie without Trinity. So these are all what I term major side characters. And so this is the framework that helps me then determine like how much work I put into the character, like how much is needed. How much stuff do I need to know about them? That
makes sense.
That's
what I was going to ask about. Like we talked about the side character being like a tool, but actually you still need them to be kind of well-rounded. They need an arc. They need the same personality traits. Are you creating them to be like your villain versus the hero, so they are there to provide for the protagonist? Like, do you create them?
Kind of. So when I then talk about side characters, predominantly I'm only really talking about major side characters. So that's why I like to start with the structure, because I don't believe that we need to spend too much time on the cameos and the minor side characters. So from henceforth, I'm talking about major ones. The other thing that I do is I create 3 whys for each major side character. The first why is a protagonist why. Why are they in this story in relation? it just made me jump. My cat's walked in. Why are they in the story in relation to the protagonist? So what are they doing for or against the protagonist? Like, are they push or pulling the protagonist, helping or hindering? Are they creating an obstacle, making the protagonist question themselves, etc., etc.? So that's the first one. The second one is a life why. So they need a reason for being in the story that is outside of the protagonist. So like maybe they have their own goal. Maybe the protagonist works in a coffee shop, and maybe this side character is a budding gymnast, and the protagonist keeps putting pressure on them to miss their meets because of something or other, right? So like, what does this character have outside the protagonist that can have a consequence either on a scene, the plot, or the protagonist themselves, right? They need a reason to not always be around the protagonist. And then the third one is more functional, and that's a scene why. Every time that side character comes into a scene, there needs to be a reason why they are there. So are they there to bring information, take information? Are they there to cause a problem? Are they there to ask a question? Are they there to help the protagonist? Like, what are they doing in that scene that they need a reason to be there? So those, I think those kind of help me like shape what you're saying. I think.
Yeah. No,
those are great
awesome.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Never thought of that before, but that just makes so much sense, and it stops you getting, or stops, general you, the writer you, getting the criticism of cardboard characters, maybe, even in the side major side characters.
I think it's also going to help a hell of a lot with editors, isn't it?
Yeah.
if there's actually a reason for that person to be in the scene, you just didn't make it up.
As we often do, because that's that whole thing of kind of when you're looking at a scene in the editing stages and you're kind of like, do I need this scene? Is there a point of it even being here? Have I just written a nice little scene for no reason and killing your darlings and things like that? We're now, for the side character, if you've got those whys, then they're there for a reason, and you can kind of it helps. So can you do setting as a side character? Would you include setting as a character, or is that just another thing entirely?
Yeah, I think you absolutely can. Like, you can have a setting cause problems, create solutions. Like, you absolutely can. It doesn't necessarily I'd have to think, because I didn't include a chapter on setting particularly. I did have one of my friends who works talks about world building a lot, write a sort of section for me. But yeah, I mean, setting is a character, but I don't view it in the same way, mostly because I write fantasy and because I expend so much time like world building anyway. So for example, in the series I've just completed, all of the houses had magic. Like, the magic came from the mansions and the castles. Like, normally we have the magicians and the people having the power, right? But I wanted my mansions to have the power. So like, each time the characters would enter, the mansions would like greet them with some kind of like shimmering power that would go over them. And when they went into the naughty clubs, wink wink, one of them would like, the door would bang on somebody's body, like, so they were like cheeky mansions and things. Awesome. So like, yeah, you can absolutely create character out of setting for sure.
Yeah. Okay, that's awesome. I love those two examples. Okay, so how much of this are you crafting before you start, and how much are you crafting as you write, like pantser versus puller maybe?
Yeah, I think I there is no right or wrong answer. I think that comes down to people's individual preferences. For me personally, I need quite a lot of world building. I need quite a lot of character. Like, I have to be able to see with my eyeballs the scene in front of me. So I can't, like, I don't write until the scene can play in a movie, and then I just write down whatever the movie is playing in my brain, if that makes sense. I don't know if people will be able to see, but basically behind me I have what I call my murder board, and this is basically like, I will find pictures of the characters, I'll find pictures of the houses, I'll find pictures of the transportation, I'll find pictures of whatever, and then in that in that process of having those pictures and feeling them, and this is distributed cognition, but moving them around the board, I come up with character personality ideas, and so for me, I have to know quite a lot before I start. That said, I only outline with post-its. So for example, I average 23 to 26 post-its. That's the story, whatever's on there. Then that expands into an 85,000 word novel. This time I've got 38. So I don't know what that's saying. It's going to be a longer novel. Yeah, maybe. But yeah, and I'm very, very consistent. It's very consistently 23 to 26 post-its, and then off I go. So I'm somewhere in the middle, I think.
And you write scenes on those? Or
yeah, so I'll kind of write everything that I know about that like scene, and sometimes like the post-it will end up as 3 chapters, and sometimes it'll end up as half a chapter. Like it just, I'm super intuitive with, like, I start with a hook, I end with a hook, I start with a hook, I end with a hook. So I like feel where it needs to end, or it's like scene consequence, like end on the cliffhanger, so they have to, and then swap point of view, so they have to wait a whole chapter to find out what happens, that kind of stuff.
So your word count for your chapters, you could have a small chapter or a long chapter, just as it falls?
Yeah, I play intentionally with pace. I average between 2,000 and 3,000 words, but then there are definitely chapters that are like 800 words, just because I'm being a naughty author. I'm torture the reader, like, I don't know. Maybe I'm just a sadist. So I do play with pacing.
Okay, that's awesome. I love how visual that is. I'm looking at your pictures, and I'm assuming those are all sort of pictures of characters and setting things. Is that what that is?
So these are all the characters down here. I've got a magical door up there. I've got a like a magical market based on Venice up there, and then like more characters down here, and then I just everything has to be done with my hands. It's the only part of the process that I cannot do digitally. I cannot outline digitally. It has to be with my hands, because there's something very visceral about the interaction between the pen and my brain, and then physically moving the post-its physically rearranges the story in my brain. It's crazy.
It's very cool.
I have to know, like, if you write in series, what do you do with that board if you're going to come back to it? Do you save it somewhere?
So I create a digital like book Bible. And then I put these post-its on I used to do it on a piece of like A1 or A0 paper. I can't remember. I've got this enormous sketchbook upstairs, and then I just fold it and chuck it in the cupboard. But now, because I write quicker, I keep it on the board here, and then I just take them all down and put them. But yeah, I do have a Bible. So I do that as I go. So like when I put a date in or a character description, I lift it out of the novel and put it into the document.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah.
Do it as you go.
Do it as I go. Yeah.
Save a lot of time when you're looking for it.
I learned the hard way.
Yeah. So that's awesome. And so do you have your side characters up there? Do they get pictures on your wall, or is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So here I've got a family. So the 2 main characters are down here, and then down this wall is a family of 5 or 4 4 siblings. I'm only at the beginning of this book. 4 siblings, and each sibling like represents something different. Okay.
So I love that. You can see your psychology background coming through with all of this. I'm just saying, all those years at university were not wasted on the author career.
I know, right? Each one represents like a virtue that a vampire would value. And
I love that.
And then I have trials in my book, and each trial is based on one of the virtues.
That's so clever, Sacha. So clever.
Very good.
So if we go back to the side characters, what makes a side character great? Like what is the
Okay, so I think as long as you are ticking some of those things that we've talked about, so if they're a major side character, they do need some kind of arc. If they're a major side character, they need some kind of backstory. They need the 3 whys. Once you've done those, that's like the base level of what is needed to create a good character. I think then what creates exceptional characters is uniqueness, like, and not across the board, but like, what is that one thing that makes them unique and makes them sound and feel different to all of the other characters? Sometimes that's about thematic representation. Sometimes that's like about the character diamond. So Robert McKee talks about this, where there's like 3 things about a character. So if I said addict, genius, socially awkward, that there's only one character really that represents, which is Sherlock Holmes, right? Everybody, if you say those 3 things, that represents Sherlock Holmes. So it's about finding, you know, those 3 things that make that side character and no other character in your book. And then there's other little things that you can do. So maybe they have something unique about their appearance. Maybe they have something unique about their voice, like in terms of their dialogue. Or so, for example, I read a book, I can't remember, Not My Problem, I think it was, something like that. But it was by Kira Smith. And every time this character spoke, they spoke in stories. And so they would start saying something and they'd go off on a story. But what she was so clever, because 1, each story was hilarious, and 2, the story led to the point, and it was like the character was taking an action. It was absolute genius. But it made that character so memorable, because I still remember it. I can't remember the character's name, but I remember the action and kind of like what his agency, what he felt like in that story. And then another thing, like just like a random tip, we always, like, for those, do any of you write romance?
Yeah.
Okay, so we always talk about the meet cute in romance, and it's really important that we get the meet cute right, where the 2 lovers meet. But what we forget about is that we can also use the device of a meet cute, but for friends. So I love it when we have a very, very memorable friend meet cute. Can't always happen in present time, but sometimes there's some kind of flashback, or you can use it like as backstory and context, or sometimes you can have it on page. And actually using like the structure of a meet cute for friends can make their entrance onto the page really memorable. And also you've got to remember that friends are often a romance in and of themselves. So it's like, well, what do these friends do that represent that romance? So it's things like random acts of kindness for the protagonist, right? Or the protagonist for the friend. Like, oh my goodness me, there is nothing I love more when a character does something because they just know that friend, right? Or it's like, you know, they can read the protagonist's emotion or what they're thinking in silence, right? It's those things that make those characters know each other better than anybody else. So it's those like quirky little tidbits that like really make it for me.
And actually, when I think about it, small town romance would be the exact place where you would do that kind of stuff, because that's what people read it for. It's like where everybody knows your name kind of vibe, right? And it's having all those, not just the romance, but all the friend romances there to kind of go, these people,
and then the quirky old characters and the, you know, the locals.
But the thing is, it's applicable in any genre. Like the other day I read The Lies of Locke Lamora, which is like a kind of a Robin Hood retelling, definitely kind of epic grimdark fantasy. And smack in the middle, he has this like interlude, and it's one chapter, and it is textbook perfection, bromance, meet cute. So and it follows the romance story structure. So the character meets and they hate each other, and he causes a problem. He gets punched in the face. So like, obviously that's, you know, enemies to lovers in a friend's way. And then, you know, he then has the realize that he made a mistake. So there's a realization moment. And then he does a grand gesture and he tries to bring glasses to make up for the glasses that got smashed. Like it was textbook perfection. And you don't forget that character. You don't forget either of those characters, and also their relationship, and it deepens their relationship, which deepens the characterization.
That's awesome.
Love that. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So, and I'm kind of thinking, you mentioned Filch as being kind of like a minor character. Sorry, this has a point, but he was also there. He's kind of like surrounded by all these young children, bright new faces, excited, happy to be there, and he's this older, disgruntled, angry, non-magical person who's in the middle of that. And I feel like he was a minor character who didn't actually have really many lines or any point, but actually that in itself made his point, like was the point of him in a lot of ways.
Juxtapositions are, without exception, the single most valuable tool at a writer's dispense. That I am so desperate to write a book on juxtapositions, and I cannot think of a marketable way to title it, because here's what I know.
Opposites attract.
Story is a juxtaposition, right?
Yeah.
If you look at the base terms, the start and end are complete opposites. Hero and villain, opposites. When you look at marketers who are very, very good at marketing their stories, almost all of them use juxtapositions in their marketing. Most good taglines have a juxtaposition in it. Adam Croft is renowned for his, could you kill your wife to save your daughter? That's a juxtaposition, kill and save, right? Yeah. If you look at TikToks, the vast majority of those that go viral have a juxtaposition hook in them. And like, I really feel strongly that if you are not using juxtapositions, you are missing out on something. You can go through the top 100 books on Amazon, and I do this sometimes, and you can see, like, in the blurbs, you can see it, like, also tropes, right? Now there's a difference between so I call tropes that have like innate conflict and structure in them, and then micro tropes are like the more scene-based things, like only one bed, which is like in a scene. Whereas enemies to lovers is a juxtaposition, right? Enemies, lovers. Fake dating, you can't fake actual date, right? That is a juxtaposition, and they have inherent conflict and like a story structure within that. But yeah, it's a juxtaposition. That's why it works. It is the greatest tool at our disposal.
You need to write that book, Sacha. Seriously.
That's awesome.
Oh man,
if only there's another word besides juxtaposition, because
it's a good word though.
It's a difficult word to put on a cover though. I don't know why. I mean, you could have it as a subtitle, like why juxtaposition is the king of all prose or something, or
yeah, I mean, you know, or how to write a book that will really sell. I mean, that might be a good title.
Exactly. Sell more books with a secret. There you go. There's your title.
Your secret juxtaposition.
The secret.
I have a secret. Exactly.
Yeah. I tell you what, I was looking back at titles for the podcast, and I'm just saying it all ties in. The ones so that's cool. And I love that idea, the juxtaposition, if I could actually say the word. And I'd never thought about that with the tropes. When you're absolutely right. Even only one bed has an inherent conflict or juxtaposition, because it's like, you know, immediately that there's what the conflict is going to be. Like, oh my God, can't just share one bed. So
and this is why those people killing it on TikTok have baked in that marketing before, and they are putting those juxtaposition hooks into their scenes, which they then lift out for TikTok.
It's very clever.
And I've heard authors talk about it working both ways, like that they've literally used TikTok, figured out the juxtapositions, and then written them so that they could use them in TikTok, if that makes sense. So it's not just
I've written 10,000 words of this story, and I've stopped because I'm literally doing research to make sure that I have the right scenes in there for that very reason.
That's fair enough, I reckon.
Like, hey, listen, it's a tough word out there. We've got to use every tool at our disposal.
We can.
Exactly.
So the side characters, they definitely have, the major ones anyway, will have their own arc. Do they have a happy ending? What kind of arcs are we giving them?
I mean, that's up to you. I mean, you can have any kind of arc for a side character. You know, often they will be some kind of representation of the theme. So if you've got terrible example, but Hunger Games, Katniss is always sacrificing herself for the good of other people. The villain is always sacrificing other people for the good of himself. But then you've got other representations in there where you've got what's her name, Prue, and she ends up actually dying and going through with the sacrifice, right, in order to save other people. So you have like these different types of representation of the same theme. So like the arc, and you can just basically play with that and have different iterations. What the way that I see it sometimes is like a maths equation. So if the protagonist is the right answer, the villain is the wrong answer, the side characters are kind of the workings out that you do to get to that right answer. So the side character might almost go through with a sacrifice and then not be able to do it, right? Or the side character might sacrifice something else, like this is a bad example, but like a business, right? They might sacrifice a business instead of them physical selves. So it's like, how can you iterate that theme to look different in the side characters?
What about villainous side characters? So is it the same for villainous side characters? Like I'm thinking, all the Harry Potter examples, but like the Peter, the one who turns into a rat, like he's a side character, right? Like he was the baddie side character, and he does kind of have an arc. I mean, he's there to again be a juxtaposition against the baddies or the goodies. Sorry, goodies. Oh my god, I can't ask the question. But yeah, what do you do with? Is it the same? Like whether they're a good
villains,
side character,
writing a villainous?
Yeah. I mean, it depends if the villain is the protagonist, right? We have this trend recently of seeing a lot of protagonists being morally grey, or if you look at like in movies, for example, Cruella, villain protagonist, the Joker movie with Joaquin Phoenix, and Deadpool, well, that's more anti-hero than anything, but like as an example, we are seeing this trend also with love interests who are morally grey, with a lot of this darker romance that's coming through. So it depends what position they are in. If they, what was the question? Does the villain have to have a,
is it the same, like whether they're a villain or a hero sidekick, if that makes sense, or a side character? Like I'm using the funny language here.
Yeah, I think it depends on the side. Like, are they a cameo, minor, or major? That is how I make the decision. Like that is what I hang that structure on. If they're a minor villain, then minor villain side character, they're not going to have a character arc. If they are a major, so for example, I hate that we're using Harry Potter, but here we are. Thingy's dad. Malfoy's dad has an arc of a form, and he is technically like on the bad side. So like that is an example of and he does fulfill that arc, even if it's not necessarily the greatest of arcs. So yeah, they can have arcs. It just depends on how major of a side character they are.
Okay, yeah,
makes sense.
Cool. Do you
just treat them the same?
Have you ever had characters in your books that were surprisingly popular? Do you know what I mean? Like I know in my ones, people
side
come
characters.
Back
do you mean?
Yeah, side characters. Sorry, I'm talking about side characters who kind of like are more popular than you were expecting. Like the readers just love them for some reason.
Yes, I think so. I usually kill them off. No, I'm kidding. Sometimes I do just because. No, there was one who did get killed off and people weren't too happy about it, but I had always planned for that one to be killed off, and actually like it was bittersweet. Like whenever I do that, I make sure it's bittersweet, because like this person was reunited with their soulmate who had passed before, so like they kind of wanted it, even though like but yeah. And then it's tricky, isn't it, because so at the moment the last series I just did was interconnected standalones. So in the first book everybody loved the twin sister, and then the twin sister got their own book, and now I've put the protagonist of the new series was a side character in the last book of my old series, so that I get like that read through, and everybody is like, I am so ready for this character's story.
Nice.
But I did it on purpose.
I mean, it's a common romance thing, isn't it? So you have the two main characters, and then you have the side characters become the you know, the main characters in the next book. So I guess we're using that.
I just killed off a side character who everyone loved through the series in a bonus epilogue, the last book in the series. Bonus epilogue, she died, and I've had a few emails and a few messages from people saying,
Wendy,
it's old, you know, but like a few people saying, that was sad, I didn't see that one, I liked her, you know, and I'm like, oh well, get over it.
But that was because you were over it.
Yeah. Someone was grumpy when they wrote that.
I wanted it wrapped up so we couldn't go back, you know. It's so funny. They get so invested though, right? It's so awesome. I love it.
Yeah. So do you have, like, I think we must be coming into the end of our time together.
Yeah.
But do you have any last tips for creating awesome side characters, or anything that you think we really need to think about? Or
I do. You got to read Sacha's book, just saying. First of all, that's the number one tip, which we'll put obviously links in the show notes, but
But she's got another one.
I've got one more, which is about understanding the dynamic of side characters in a scene. So sometimes we can get side characters take over, and we're never really sure if they're like, are they at the right level of kind of interaction? So I like to do like a thought experiment. Hello, psychology background. But the way that I do it is I think about a dinner party. If your protagonist is hosting this dinner party, they are the host, which means they make all the decisions about that dinner party, right? They decide when to serve the main course. They decide what the main course is. They decide when we're going to have pudding. But the side characters might tell a joke that captures everybody's attention at one point in it. They might help the protagonist take the plates out and put them in the dishwasher. They might say something embarrassing to embarrass the protagonist at one point, but they're never there taking over and making the decisions. They're never deciding that we're going to serve goose foie gras instead of, you know, toad's legs or whatever, right? They don't make those decisions at the dinner party. So I always kind of I always kind of think about, in each scene, is my protagonist the host of the dinner party here? And if they are, then I've done it right.
Such a good tool. Thank you for that.
That's really, really helpful, actually. That's awesome. That's a perfect place to leave this discussion of side characters. I've got many more questions, but I'm going to like hold them in because, you know.
That would be good.
Wendy will tell me off otherwise. So if people want to learn more or find out more about you and your books, where do they go? Where's the best place to find you?
So that's sachablack.co.uk, Sacha with a C, SACHA, colour black, and then .co.uk, or Instagram at Sacha Black Author, or my podcast, the Rebel Author Podcast.
Nice work.
And I wanted to just give a shout out to the Rebel Author Podcast. I've been a listener since episode 1, and it's fantastic. Absolutely love it. And you need to, I mean, I can't believe anybody's not listening to it, but if they aren't, then I make sure that there's a link in our show notes here. But I really, really always love the question at the end is, how have you been rebellious? Or, you know, however you phrase it, but it's so cool. Is somebody that, you know, somebody older that was, you weren't encouraged to be a rebel, and it feels so naughty. Even think of these rebellious things. So, yeah.
It's so funny. Everybody always is like rabbit in the headlight when I ask it. And I prepare everybody as well. This is the hilarious thing.
know. And it's the same question. So it's like, how can you not?
Brilliant. Absolutely.
It's so good, and it's so interesting, the answers, and often they're not what I would have expected from after listening to the guest. Anyhow, great podcast. 100% recommend. 10 out of 10.
Thank you.
All the stars.
Awesome. That's fantastic. And where can we be found?
Well, we can be found at spargirlspodcast.com, and we can be found at Patreon too, at Spargirls Podcast, and we've got some exciting new offerings there, none of which involve pictures or weird videos. Anyway, moving on from that. So come along to patreon.com/Spargirls podcast.
Veer left that I wasn't expecting.
No, well, I don't know why.
For a change.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're not at the OnlyFans point, but come along and support us and then we won't have to be. Just saying.
Anyway, thank you all for listening to another episode of the Spargirls podcast. We've had a fantastic time here with Sacha Black. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sacha.
And we will be back again next week for another episode. But for now, farewell.
Keep well.
Bye.
Bye.